early days of Broadway musicals and then bring it up to closer to the present day. And there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end if you have any, rather than during. But here we go. The whole idea of New York being the center of American theater goes back to the mid 18th century, back to the 1700s. And it stayed there at that time and well into the 19th century. New York meant, for people, the southern tip of Manhattan. That's where people were. Most of Manhattan was farmland. It's all occupied by buildings and skyscrapers today and all that, but then it was farmland. And the first theaters were very near, below Wall Street, near the tip of the island. But when it started to expand in the mid 19th century, they wanted to build more theaters, but land was so expensive in that area of New York that they became sort of pioneers, taking some of the farmland a little farther north and building theaters in what we call the Broadway district today. And that's brought people up, and eventually, of course, they were swallowed up by the city of New York, but that's how they started to go. It was cheap real estate that drove them to where they are today. The first probably original Broadway musical came out in 1866. It was called The Black Crook. It was based on the old Faust story, selling your soul to the devil and all that. It took 5.5 hours. Some people today say it wasn't really a musical because it was just a play with songs dropped in. But when you think about it, what is a Broadway musical for the most part, except a play with songs dropped in? It was a huge extravaganza. They had big crowds and they had animals and great sets and all that sort of thing. They spent $25,000 in investing, and it was a fortune in those days. And they thought they would lose their shirts. But in fact, it ran for 474 performances on Broadway and then toured around the country. They made millions on it. Vaudeville came along in 1881 with a show called The Mulligan Guard Picnic, which was imported from Europe, from England, where vaudeville was already very big. In 1879, history was made when Gilbert and Sullivan decided to do the world premiere of, you'll love this, Pirates of Penzance in New York on New Year's Eve. And they did it there so they could secure the US copyright to the rights to put the show on. It didn't work. The legalism didn't work. But in any case, Pirates of Penzance was seen in New York before it was seen in London. What developed as the primary musical medium for Broadway shows was called operetta. It was very much like opera, except it had spoken dialogue rather than sung, but the music tended to be somewhat in the operatic direction. There were three composers who were the kings of the operetta, and the first born in 1815, all three of them, by the way, were imports. They were not originally Americans. They became Americans, but they came from Europe. The first was Victor Herbert, born in 1859, who moved to the US. He was a wonderful cellist. He became the principal cellist of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. And while he was here, he continued to compose as he had back home, but he wrote classical music. He wrote concert music. He didn't write shows. And then it was interesting that in 1894, he performed his a cello concerto in New York, I think his second concerto, and a visiting composer, Antonin Dvorak, heard it and decided to write his own cello concerto. So Herbert inspired that while Dvorak was spending his 3-year stint in America. It was in the same year, later the same year, that he produced his first operetta. And in the 20th century, his operettas became really popular. He wrote such things as Babes in Toyland, The Red Mill, Naughty Marietta, Sweethearts, etc. And our first song today is going to be from a show that I absolutely love. In fact, I appeared in when I was in high school. I didn't have much of a part because they heard me sing, but nonetheless, I was in the show, Babes in Toyland, and the song is Toyland. So here we go. I'll give you an introduction, and then Christina will jump in and we'll do Toyland. Here we go. And good old song, Toyland. Right. The next character to come along on the stage of operetta was Rudolf Frimmel. He was born in Prague in 1879, 20 years after Victor Herbert. He studied composition there with Dvorak after Dvorak had been to America. And he came to America touring as the piano accompanist for violinist Jan Kubelik. And he loved it in America. He simply didn't go home. He played as a pianist at the Metropolitan Opera and eventually premiered his own first piano concerto at Carnegie Hall with the New York Symphony, as it was called in those days. He also, on the same program, played the Grieg piano concerto and several piano solos that he had written. So he carried most of the program there. He got his big break in 1912. Victor Herbert had been conducting, he was a good conductor, conducted the Pittsburgh Symphony for a while too, Herbert did. He was conducting his own show, Naughty Marietta, in New York. And it was customary for the big song for soprano, the Italian Street Song. If you haven't heard that, you should. It's a wonderful soprano solo. It was customary for that song to be encored if the crowd wanted it. The soprano refused to. Victor Herbert walked out, left the production, and said he wasn't working for that production company anymore. So the guy who was head of that production, who had contracted Herbert, or at least had a promise that he would create a show called The Firefly later that year, had to find someone else. And he knew the pianist, budding composer Rudolf Frimmel, and asked him to do it. By the way, that theatrical producer's name was Arthur Hammerstein, whose father was Oscar Hammerstein I, and whose nephew was Oscar Hammerstein II, who did pretty well later on in company with other composers writing the lyrics. In any case, Rudolf Frimmel, in his show Rose Marie from 1924, wrote a song we're going to take a look at now called Indian Love Call. And notice it's not really easy to sing. Already you have more than an octave worth of range. When I'm calling you, you have a lot of range there, almost as much as the Star Spangled Banner, because it's more operatic. In any case, here we go with Indian Love Call. Here we go, 1 and 2 and. And then it gets even more operatic. That's enough of that. Anyway, that was Rudolf Frimmel, and he was great fun back in 1924. Okay, the third of the triumvirate of operetta composers was from Hungary, coming to New York in 1909, where he worked in a factory. His name was Zygmunt Romberg. Later, he became a pianist in restaurants. He started in an orchestra. He published some songs. He was hired, as many of the great composers for Broadway were. They were hired not so much to create a show as to add a song to a show somewhere along the line. And he was hired by a group called the Schubert Brothers. Now, a guy named David Schubart, Schubart, came to New York from Russia in 1881. He tried to break into theater management, and eventually he and his three sons, Lee, Sam, and Jacob, managed to do that very well. And they basically took over theater in America. By 1924, they had 86 theaters throughout the United States. A few years later, by dealing with other managers, they were controlling the programming at 1,000 theaters throughout the nation. The Schubert brothers were it. And they had more power over the creation of shows, plays, and musicals than anybody else. In fact, when I was 18 years old, I was working for the Fred Waring Music Workshops, and a guy named Ray Sachs Schroeder. Ray was a wonderful guy with all sorts of talents. He was Waring's choreographer. He was able, playing the sax with one hand, to hold a lasso over his head, and the rope would be around his body, and he would do a tap dance with the lasso going while he played sax in the other hand. How Ray did all this stuff, I don't know. But he said to me one day, "Jerry, can you give me a Schubert in F?" And I thought, what in the world is a Schubert in F? But I know what it is now. Here's a Schubert in F. That's what that is, a Schubert in F. So we're going to sing now song that was produced by the Schuberts, the Desert Song, One Alone. Desert Song is my favorite Romberg show. 1925, there was a revolution in Morocco where a tribe called the Rifs were trying to get some independence from the colonial rule of the French. And that gave a whole kind of Arabic, Northern African, exotic mood to this show. Here's One Alone, and it starts again with quite a lead. Let's try it. Here we go, One Alone, and up. That's a pretty song. Well, there we have the third of our triumvirate. We had Herbert, we had Frimmel, we had Romberg. Now, the person who more than any other really created the shape of the Broadway musical today took that style and the vaudeville style and everything else that was going on and started to create real book musicals, musicals in which they told a story and which the lyrics and the music and the script and the choreography and the costumes and the scenery all contributed to making a unified idea in using normal, regular characters, not these exotic people from Morocco or your sophisticated monarchs or nobility of Europe or whatever, but just regular people. The man who owned Broadway was George M. Cohan. And he was born in the midst of these, this other triumvirate. He was older than some, younger than others. He came from Providence, Rhode Island, where he was born in an Irish Catholic family. His parents were vaudeville performers. So he grew up being the fourth person in their act. Now, if you haven't seen the movie from 1942, Yankee Doodle Dandy, you really should, because there, Jimmy Cagney, who started as a song and dance man before he did all those gangster shows, does a wonderful job. He knew Cohan. He knew Cohan's dancing style. He danced like Cohan with this kind of stiff-legged style. He got himself an Oscar. It was Best Picture in 42 and Best Actor as well. Super job Cagney did. See that movie, Yankee Doodle Dandy. But you hear in that show, George M. Cohan announced, "My father thanks you, my mother thanks you, my father thanks you, my sister thanks you, and I thank you." And he really did that, speaking for the gang. He toured with them for years, decades actually, and started to write songs and skits for them in the summertime when he had time off. And he did that even as a teenager. And the interesting thing was, they toured in what we consider kind of the school year now. In the summer, he would spend it with his grandmother in Massachusetts, where he became just an American kid. He played baseball. He went swimming. He went to the parks. He went on hikes. He did that sort of thing, went biking, had friends, and became an American kid. And he loved the whole American style. And so that's the way he wrote his songs. So we're going to do now a song he wrote from his first really big successful show, 1904, called Little Johnny Jones. And it's all about New York. And it's called Give My Regards to Broadway. There we go. Give my regards to Broadway, and that's a great old song. You know so many of his songs. 45 Minutes from Broadway, Mary's a Grand Old Name, Over There. And the one we're going to do now, You're a Grand Old Flag, which was from a few years later from another show. I bet, and he's very smart on this. Sometimes he quotes songs that people know in the course of the song. And this introduction, you'll hear, which comes up near the end of the song, as I play the introduction, you'll hear Old Acquaintance in the middle of it. Let's give you another chance. 1, 2, go. You're a grand old flag. Grand Old Flag. He really knew how to write a song. Now, what happened after George M. Cohan? Well, we got a series of, I think, the 5 great composers of the golden era of Broadway. Now, if you think you know who one of those 5 might be, let me tell you characteristics of them, okay? 4 out of the 5 had characteristics in common. 1, they were from New York. 2, they were born from recent immigrants. Their families were relatively new in the States. 3, they were Jewish. 4, they were not terribly well off. Some were middle class, most, a little less so. And 5, they were heterosexual. Those 5 elements, 4 of the 5 of these leading composers of the Golden Age had in common. So can you name somebody from the Golden Age? Unmute yourself and tell me who that might be.
Oscar Hammerstein.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm talking composers, not lyricists. If we were doing lyricists, Ruth, you'd be absolutely right.
How about Rogers?
Rogers, good. Richard Rogers. Who else?
Jerome Kern.
Pardon?
Jerome Kern.
Jerome Kern, yes, absolutely. Any other guesses?
Irving Berlin.
Irving Berlin. Okay, 3 out of 3. Excellent.
Gershwin.
I'm sorry?
Gershwin.
I didn't. Gershwin? Gershwin, yes. We got 4 out of 5. Perfect. The one we're missing is the one that doesn't have all these characteristics in common. He was from Peru, Indiana, and was very wealthy.
Cole Porter.
Cole Porter. Good. 5 out of 5. Maybe I should quit. You guys don't need this. You know all this stuff already. Okay. The oldest of these guys was Jerome Kern. Jerome Kern was born in 1879. Excuse me, 1885. He was born in 1885. His father was a German immigrant who ran a stable, became a successful merchant. His mother was of Czech origin. She taught her son how to play piano, how to play organ. He wrote songs for his high school musical, but he never finished high school. His father insisted he go into the family business, but he was no good at it. So he went to New York College of Music. He published his first piano piece in 1902 when he was 17 years old. Then he went to Heidelberg to study music. He worked as a pianist and as a song plugger. And several of these guys did. Irving Berlin did it as well. George Gershwin did too. Song plugger. In those days, if you wanted to make money on a song, you couldn't record it and sell recordings. Hadn't been invented yet. What they did was they sold copies of the music. They sold sheet music. And so in order to sell these songs, they would have people in little piano rooms, people like Jerome Kern and Irving Berlin and George Gershwin sitting there playing whatever song somebody brought in order to, so they could hear it and tell them how great a song it was, and so they sold more copies. And that's what Jerome Kern did. Now, he made history. He did a number of shows and wrote a lot of songs But the history-making show he did together with Oscar Hammerstein II. He loved the Edna Ferber novel Showboat. And in those days, that was 2 words in the novel, Showboat. And most Broadway musicals at that time were escapist. They were fun. They were merry stories. But this show, which premiered on December 27th, 1927, and changed American musical theater history. It was about alcoholism. It was about divorce. It was about racism, especially the objections to an interracial marriage. This was considered very controversial. And in fact, it's told that the audience who left the first performance in December of 1927 left almost in silence. They didn't know what to make of it. Now, Kern wrote a number of shows, but this is the only show of his that's really done a lot today. And we're going to do his perhaps most famous song from that, Old Man River. He wrote it for the voice of Paul Robeson, a remarkable man who he was a brilliant student. He was Phi Beta Kappa at Rutgers College, it was called then, Rutgers University today. All-American football player. He made his living as an actor. He acted in Eugene O'Neill plays. As a singer, he did concerts as a singer. He studied in Europe and concertized all over. And also, he went to law school and succeeded in graduating from law school. Brilliant guy, and made history for Black people in America. He was the original. And if you see the 1836 movie, you can see Paul Robeson playing Joe, who sings Old Man River. Here we go. It starts pretty low. Old Man River. Here we go. And great song, Old Man River. No question, okay? That's Jerome Kern. Next, we go to a man who was born with the name of Israel Bailin. His family was from Belarus. There are records that say that young Israel was born in Siberia, but his family was settled in Belarus. And then they had the same thing happen to them that we see depicted in the musical Fiddler on the Roof. They were persecuted. They left. They came to the United States when young Israel was 5. And he said later he couldn't remember anything of the earlier years of his life. His father could not find work as a cantor in a temple, which is what he had done back home. He worked in a kosher meat market, but he died when Israel was 13. Israel went out and sold papers on the street. His brother worked in a shirt factory. His sisters worked in a cigar factory. But while he was selling his papers on the street, he heard music coming out of restaurants and saloons. And he started singing along with that music. And soon he was getting tips for singing the songs with the pianists in those restaurants. He put together a group of musicians, kids to do the same thing. He taught himself to play piano and started doing that sort of thing, plugging songs and playing in restaurants and all that. He first published a song when he was a teenager. It was called Marie from Sunny Italy. He made 37 cents from it, and he spelled his name, instead of Israel Balin, he spelled it I period Berlin. Gradually, he got a reputation for being able to produce songs. Unlike what other people did, he produced the songs with words and music. George M. Cohan did that too. He did that as well. Most composers in the golden era of Broadway didn't do that. First hit at age 23, Alexander's Ragtime Band in 1911. Irving Berlin was born in 1888. And with that song, he actually wrote his full name, what would be the full name for the rest of his life, Irving Berlin. A year later, when he was 24, he got married to a woman named Dorothy Getz, who died 6 months later of typhoid fever, which she had contracted when they were on their honeymoon in Havana. It made him very, very sad. And he's writing now, he wrote a song. He then met another gal and fell in love with her. Her family didn't, because she wasn't Jewish, her family didn't want her to marry him, and he was not in a very reputable, he was making money, but he wasn't in a very reputable profession. And so they kept her away from him, and he wrote this song thinking of her. It's called What'll I Do? What'll I do? Really pretty song. By the way, he played piano, but he taught himself to play by ear. And the easiest way he found to do that was to play on the black keys of the piano. He never learned to read music. He knew how to write it down, but he never learned to read it while he played. He played everything by ear. And so what he did, since he played all his songs, that as he composed them, he played them all in the key of F sharp or G flat, whatever you want to call it. He didn't care because he wasn't thinking about notes. He played them on the black keys. He had a piano made for himself so that it had a lever, and the lever could change it so it could be in C major or in A major or in whatever key he wanted. It didn't have to be in G flat or F sharp, though he played it in that key. He had a special piano made for him. Little crazy. Okay, his biggest show ever was not early in his life. It was late in his life when he was nearly 60 years old. Two fellows named Rogers and Hammerstein had been so successful in their musicals that they started investing money in producing musicals for other people. And they wanted to do one based on Annie Oakley, the great sharpshooter from the 19th century. And they had Jerome Kern lined up to do it. And then Jerome Kern died. So they turned to Irving Berlin and said, they were all friends. Irving, you want to do this? And he created the show that was the most successful show for him ever. And we're going to do a big hit from that show called There's No Business Like Show Business. There's no business like Okay. And I love the words too, even with a turkey that you know will fold. It's great. It's just great fun. Irving Berlin took songwriting very seriously. He said that they were the result of hard work every day. He didn't believe in waiting until you got inspired and then writing a song. He tried to write a song every day. He wrote more than 1,500 songs altogether. When he was a youngster, he went to Victor Herbert, who was the big guy at the time, 30 years older than he was, and asked him if he should study music theory. Herbert said he had such a great talent that theory would only get in his way, cramp his style. So he wrote songs studiously, but in his own strange way, playing on the black keys and all that, and creating the words as well as the music. George Gershwin was one person who recognized his talent. Gershwin said, "I want to say at once that I frankly believe that Irving Berlin is the greatest songwriter that has ever lived. His songs are exquisite cameos of perfection, and each one of them is as beautiful as its neighbor. Irving Berlin remains, I think, America's Schubert. But apart from his genuine talent for songwriting, Irving Berlin has had a greater influence upon American music than any other one man. It was Irving Berlin who was the first to have created a real inherent American music." Jerome Kern, another of these greats, says, "Irving Berlin has no place in American music. He is American music." When he was writing during World War I, he was only 30 years old, but the army drafted him into not to fight, but to write songs and skits and shows to entertain the troops. And of course, what was happening in the war was headlines all over every day. And the New York papers said when Irving Berlin got drafted to do that, the headline said, "Army takes Berlin." Little bit wasn't really accurate as far as the war was concerned, as far as geography of the war was concerned, but they had a great deal of fun with it. And he created a show called Yip Yip Yap Hank. It was such a fun thing. Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning was in that show. You may know that song. But the song he decided to cut from that was too serious. It was too heartfelt. And although he loved to write songs like that, when he got married to this girl whose parents didn't want her to marry him, he wrote a song called Always, very tender song. You may know, "I'll be loving you always." He wrote that song for her, and they did stay married for decades. But in any case, he took this serious song and decided not to release it until 20 years later, in 1938, when the singer Kate Smith sang it on her radio program. But we all know it as a song that many people think should be our national anthem. It's "God Bless America." Here we go. God bless There it is. And of course, though he was a Jewish kid, he wrote the most popular Christmas song besides the traditional carols that's ever been created, White Christmas. Just fantastic. Okay, that's Irving Berlin. Now, oh, by the way, he was born in 1888. He died in 1989. He lived to be 101 years old, and he gave all the royalties for the publication of God Bless America to the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. Good guy. Okay, we're going now to the oddball among the group. Cole Porter hailed from Indiana, where his mother was the daughter of the richest guy in the state. She was a real stage mother, started him young on violin and piano, on composing, first operetta. He was born in 1891, operetta was still popular. And he was popularized by his mom, who, like Mozart's dad, lied about his age to make him seem even more remarkable than he was. His grandfather paid him to go to prep school in Massachusetts. He ended up at Yale, where he wrote the song while he was undergraduate there. He wrote 300 songs while he was an undergraduate at Yale, many of which were produced in musicals there. But the song that's still played every touchdown by the Yale band, which I played in for 4 years, after every touchdown, the mascot at Yale is the bulldog, and the song is called Bulldog, Bulldog, Bow, Wow, Wow. It goes, Bulldog, whoops, Bulldog, Bulldog, Bow, Wow, Wow, Meanwhile, yeah. Bulldog, Bulldog, Bow, Wow, Wow, our team can never fail, and goes on like that. He wrote it. He was a class of 1913, and it's still the ultimate Yale fight song. He traveled to Europe. He wrote for his first songs while he was in France. He went to France during World War I. He says that he was in the French Foreign Legion. The French Foreign Legion has no record of that, but Cole Porter made up all sorts of things. In 1918, he met a woman named Linda Lee Thomas, who was 8 years older than he. And though she knew perfectly well he was gay, they got married, and their marriage lasted forever. And there, he actually wrote some serious music that was performed by the same groups that were performing the contemporary composers there, like Darius Milhaud, and he was very much in with them. Interesting guy. His first Broadway show didn't come until he was 36 years old in 1928. It was called Paris. He got it simply because Rodgers and Hart had dropped out of doing it. If you've ever heard the song, Let's Misbehave, or the song, Let's Do It, Let's Fall in Love, that's what he did, okay? He had a show in 1929 called 50 Million Frenchmen, which got bad reviews and was about to close. But Irving Berlin was quoted in a New York paper saying it was the best show he'd seen in years. It revived the show. It ran 254 performances. Berlin helped out young Cole Porter. He wasn't that young. He was 3 years younger, but he was late in getting started. Here's one of his songs from the show Jubilee from 1935, which also featured the song Begin the Beguine, which we're not doing because it's the longest standard song ever written. It's over 100 measures long to get through the whole thing. But we're going to do instead just one of those things. It was, here we go. Ready? It was just one of those things. Just got it. That's the way it goes. That's enough of that. Thank you, Cole. Great fun. But we want to do another song by him too. It's interesting that, again, he was known in some ways more for writing songs than he was for writing shows. He wrote for film, he wrote for Broadway shows, but he didn't get his biggest show until 1948. When he was 57. It was shortly after Irving Berlin had had such a success with Annie Get Your Gun. And this show won the first Tony Award ever given out for a musical play. It was called Kiss Me, Kate. It was based on Shakespeare, Taming of the Shrew, and it had a wonderful cast and wonderful success. And here's kind of his answer to Irving Berlin, there's no business like show business. Here's another opening, another show. And I love the last couple of lines. It says, the overture is about to start. You cross your fingers and hold your heart. That's what it's about, to produce a show. Here's another opening. Go. that song. Okay, that's Cole Porter, quite a guy. Pardon Bingley, our little doggy gets excited whenever he thinks something's going on outside or whenever he likes a song, either one. Next, we have George Gershwin, born in 1898, 10 years after Irving Berlin, 7 years after Cole Porter, born Jacob Bruskin Gershowitz. His parents came from Russia. They had known each other when they were growing up in Russia, but they emigrated separately, met again in New York, and got together. And they got together in 1895. And the next year, Ira Gershwin was born, and 2 years later, George was born, and they had 2 younger kids as well. His dad worked as a foreman in a shoe factory. They lived in the Yiddish district of Brooklyn, and they saw a lot of Yiddish theater. They got a piano for young Ira to learn how to play. Ira didn't have much interest in it, but George did, and he kind of stole the piano away. He started playing as a song plugger on the New York 23rd Street called Tin Pan Alley, where they were publishing all the songs. His first hit came when he was 20 years old. It was called Swanee, with words by Irving Caesar. Al Jolson put it into a show because he liked it. And after that, his career was made. He was getting so, he also, the same year he wrote that first successful song, he wrote his first string quartet. He was serious about composition as well. In 1924, the biggest band leader in New York, Paul Whiteman, asked him to write. It's a great story. You should read up about it. He said one day that he would ask Gershwin to write a piece for his band that was a serious piece of jazz. And then sometime in January of 1924, George's brother Ira read in the newspaper that they were having a concert on February 12th at Aeolian Hall in New York, and they were going to premiere a new piece written for piano solo and band, Paul Whiteman's band, that George Gershwin was composing. Gershwin had no idea that that was the case. So he wrote this piece in 3 weeks, and we had Rhapsody in Blue. Unbelievable. He went to, after that, he had it orchestrated by another man named Freddie Grofé, whose Grand Canyon Suite you may know. But it was like he couldn't write for band or orchestra. He didn't know how to do that. He decided he would never let that happen to him again. He went to Europe to study. He went to Nadia Boulanger, who refused to teach him. He went to Maurice Ravel, who turned him down by saying, "Why become a second-rate Ravel when you're a perfectly good Gershwin?" He went to Stravinsky, who asked him how much money he had made from his compositions the year before. And of course, he made many more times what Stravinsky had made. So they let him alone. Gershwin had to teach himself. And while he was in Paris, he wrote An American in Paris, and he orchestrated himself as he said he would. Okay, there's a ton of songs that we could do of his, but maybe kind of his prototypical song, his great song, was from Girl Crazy in 1930, premiered by a really belter of a woman singer named Ethel Merman. It's called I Got Rhythm. And it's got really strange rhythm. Sounds like 4 notes in a row, they're even, but against the beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's kind of a syncopated beat. Here we go. And oh, 1. Rhythm. Oh boy, that is George Gershwin. Sad, the story. In 1937, when he was 38 years old, he started to get big headaches, and he smelled burning rubber all the time. He tried to play his concerto in F, did not do well in February of that year. In July, he collapsed at home, fell into a coma. Doctors opened up his head and discovered a huge tumor, which they could do nothing about. He died on July 11th that year at the age of 38. He had so much music in him that we lost, but he made history as being the ultimate composer who composed on the concert side and on the Broadway popular music side as well. Our final composer today is Richard Rodgers, born in 1902, and he was, besides Cole Porter, probably the best well-off as a youngster. His father had changed the family name from Rogozinski, a good Russian Jewish name, to Rodgers, but his father was a doctor, physician, so they did okay. He started playing piano at the age of 6. He went to Columbia University in his native New York, which was at the time attended by one Oscar Hammerstein II, and had recently graduated Lorenz Hart, the two men with whom he'd collaborate most often. He was still in high school when he first wrote a song with Lorenz Hart. Hart had already graduated from Columbia, and they wrote a song that was added as an extra to a show. But they wrote 36 shows together, including A Connecticut Yankee, Love Me Tonight, Hallelujah, I'm a Bum, On Your Toes, Jumbo, many others. On Your Toes starred Ray Bolger and Monty Woolley, if you've heard of these guys from old theater, and choreography by Georges Balanchine. Just spectacular, successful stuff. One of the shows that he wrote with Lorenz Hart, was called I'd Rather Be Right. And it was about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, written in 1937, when Roosevelt was in his second term, very popular president. And who was the person they hired to be Franklin Roosevelt and to actually dance the role? Everybody knew that Roosevelt couldn't dance, but they had a guy who was dressed up exactly like him, had the cigarette and the glasses and the fedora and all that. The person they got to play was an aging actor and composer named George M. Cohan. They hired him to be Franklin Roosevelt. It was extremely successful, and Franklin Roosevelt loved the show. Okay, that was his career, and he wrote more songs, although we always hear Rodgers and Hammerstein. He wrote many more songs with Lorenz Hart than he did with Hammerstein. Now, in 1943, 42-43, a very popular play from Broadway called Green Grow the Lilacs, kind of Western set thing, Rodgers loved. He wanted to make it into a musical. He went to Larry Hart, and Hart, who was already kind of having physical difficulties, he was an alcoholic, he was sick, he didn't like the idea of a Western show. He was an urban guy. He wanted to do sophisticated, snappy things. Occasionally they wrote beautiful ballads like My Funny Valentine or Blue Moon, but mostly they wrote kind of snappy, witty, urbane songs in the Cole Porter kind of direction. But he said, no, I can't do that. He went off, got drunk in Mexico, and died a few months later. So Rodgers went to a guy he'd written a song or two with back when he was back in college, named Oscar Hammerstein II. Hammerstein had been the lyricist, for example, for Jerome Kern, had many successful songs. Together, they took Green Grow the Lilacs and turned it into their first success, Oklahoma, the first show they wrote together. And I love the story of the first song they wrote together. Hammerstein was meticulous. He spent weeks, even months, creating the exact right words. And he came to Rodgers' apartment one day in New York and said, I've got this song, Dick, that I've been writing for a couple of months. I think I've got the words exactly right now. Let me show it to you. And when there's a bright golden haze on the meadow, there's a bright golden haze on the meadow. The corn is as high as an elephant's eye, and it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. Oh, what a beautiful morning. And this was the opening show song for Oklahoma, which is sung by Curly from off stage. That was kind of history making as well. In any case, Rodgers said, hey, sit down, Oscar. Let me look at this. He went to another room, 20 minutes, came back with the music written. And Hammerstein was just floored. He thought, I spent weeks on this. And Dick Rodgers makes the music in a few minutes. It was the beginning of a wonderful relationship. They wrote 9 shows together, 5 real all-time great ones. And their first one was Oklahoma. So, hey, we're doing Oklahoma. Let's do Oklahoma. Okay. You know the song. Here we go, Oklahoma. Go, Oklahoma, Oklahoma. Okay, by the way, as you saw, Oklahoma properly has an exclamation point in the title of the song and in the title of the show. Other shows followed quickly after that. Carousel in 1945, which has If I Loved You, June is Busting Out All Over, the Carousel Waltz. This was a real nice clam bake, and the longest single song written to that point for monologue called The Soliloquy, 8-minute long song, which I absolutely adore, and ending with the very moving You'll Never Walk Alone. I conducted that when I was 23 years old. First show I ever did, and the first real conducting I ever did, and it was conducting Carousel in Newport, Rhode Island when I was 23 that led me to become a conductor. They followed that in 1949 with South Pacific, based on James Michener's short stories. And then in 1951 came The King and I. And then in 1959, the fifth of their great shows, their last great show, The Sound of Music. They also wrote State Fair as a movie first. They wrote Cinderella as a TV show, which was a great launching pad for Julie Andrews, who was starring at the time in, you know what it is, Lerner and Lowe's My Fair Lady on Broadway. Took time from that show to rehearse. She rehearsed during the day on Cinderella and then performed My Fair Lady at night. It was a huge success. But probably their most popular show today, not my favorite, but the most popular one, is Climb Every Mountain. And he learned how to create songs that really moved you, like in a deeper way than he ever could with Lorenz Hart, because this is what Hammerstein was aiming at, making people move their hearts. And so he could write the music to support that, like You'll Never Walk Alone from Carousel, and like Climb Every Mountain. Climb. Climb Every Mountain. Great, great song. We have just one more to conclude our Broadway thoughts for today. If you think about the great contributions, a couple months ago, I did a program about spirituals and how they developed into blues and jazz, and how this is the original great American produced music. The Broadway musical is the other one. Of course, they're made all over. They're popular everywhere now, but this was the great era. And I'd like to close it with the last song that Rodgers and Hammerstein ever wrote together. Hammerstein was sick. He had cancer and he would die just weeks later. It's Edelweiss from The Sound of Music. And if you listen to the chords, they're simpler than any other song practically we've done today. He wanted to emulate the idea of an Austrian folk song that might have been sung actually in the Alps by the Trapp family. And so he wrote Edelweiss. And he loved to tell, as an older man, Rodgers lived longer than Hammerstein, music with other people, but never as great as he had done with Hammerstein. He told the story of how an older man came up after one of the shows, performances of Sound of Music, and said, "Thank you for doing that song, Edelweiss. I remember my grandmother singing that to me when I was a kid." And of course, grandmother had never heard it. Rodgers made it up, but he did so well at imitating that folk song that this native of the Alps thought that he had heard it when he was young. We'll say farewell. Thanks for being with us here with Edelweiss. Thanks for being aboard. Thanks, Christina, for playing all those songs with me. Thanks those of you who could sing. Love Broadway.